Welcome to another episode of the Group Dynamic Podcast. In this podcast, we're discussing certain topics around group dynamics or interpersonal dynamics. And in the last episodes, we talked about the OLAB, the Organizational Laboratory or Organizational Training, as it is sometimes called. And if you're interested about the concept as a whole, I encourage you to listen to the first episode of this little mini-series where we in-depth discuss the OLAB, which is basically 100 people, 1 week in one hotel and just one task. Create an organization that is capable to take a decision. And in the last episode, we talked about the work in smaller groups and how it might be helpful to come up with a representative, with a delegate, to solve the issue that as a small group you have to negotiate with the larger system of 100 people. And this is Roland, based in Vienna, working at one of the universities of applied sciences, and me, Jürgen, based in Berlin, working at another university of applied sciences. And together we are looking back at 3 OLABs that we have attended. And in this series, we try to share our experience about being in such an organizational laboratory and attending a training. Roland, it's great to have you here again to talk about the ending of the OLAB.
Yeah, hello Jürgen. Great to talk to you again for me also. And let's see how we make a nice ending here in our series.
So that's the overarching topic. And at the end of the OLAB, by the way, I realized how difficult endings for me personally are and how helpful it was to involve the staff in one of the discussions. So we talked a lot about conflicts that we had throughout the OLAB. We talked a lot about patterns that we have repeated and all these type of things. And it all comes to an end, unlike that compared to other organizations, they usually try to exist as long as possible. The OLAB has a defined end. So it's roughly, I think, 5.5 days, 1 week, from Sundays to Saturdays. And I was quite happy because it seemed to have ended very well in my case, because at a certain point the staff suggested that a certain task, or the staff suggested a certain task that we could work on as an organization, and that helped at least me, and from my point of view, the organization, to focus on something, to give us a purpose. And I'm not saying what the purpose was, just not to spoil it, but that helped us to create purpose for each and everyone. Still, I found the ending quite difficult because in another episode I mentioned that I pulled back a little bit, retreated a little bit, because I said there is not that much at stake in the last episode when we talked about the small group. But at the end, I realized there is quite a lot at stake, and I got heavily emotionally invested, which was not only beneficial because it created a lot of conflict, because we had a lot of discussions in the end. But overall, I would say it ended quite well. And I'm wondering, how was it for you, Roland, the 2 OLABs? How did they end? Because I know they're not always ending that well.
Well, I can just give an individual picture of that. And individually, the first one, sort of, I did not take enough care of setting an end point for myself. So I, even at the end, on the last day, on the very last minutes, I really picked up a lot of emotions, which were totally positive, but it was like an emptiness after that. So instead of making a good end point for myself and being aware that's the end, even at the last minutes, as I said, I picked up emotions. And then when all the people left the hotel, and I also left, I fell into like a hole. It was like falling apart. And this was my learning from the first one. And in the second one, I really took care that I begin already mentally to step into the ending one day before the last day.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, tomorrow it's the ending. So think about who you want to talk to again. Think about who you want to say, whatever you want to say. Think on that it will be over and try to get a nice wrap up. Try to really let the emotions go. Don't pick up new emotions. And then on the last day, I had the nice experience that my colleagues and I did a sort of cathartic expression of our whatever we have experienced. And the interesting thing was, while after the first organizational training, I had the idea of not having achieved the goal, because the goal was, well, the task was to set up an organization that can make a decision. And the first organizational training I participated did not achieve that. And I had a little bit the idea, oh my God, I didn't achieve the task. So it was like a failure. And in the second one, I said, oh my God, it's all about the process. Because however it ends, it ends. And I can learn out of that. And I can think about what I have done right, what feels right to me, that gave me calmness, or that did I went into every conflict I should went into? Did I avoid any conflict I shouldn't step into, and so forth? And then I said, oh my God, it's all about the process. So make a nice cathartic let go of it. And that was it.
That was it. That sounds dramatic. A cathartic let go of it.
Well, it was dramatic. I mean, it was like, let's say, from the today's viewpoint, I would say that there is a lot of emotion. You know, there are a lot of encounters. You discuss to several people. Sometimes it heats really up. You know, you are maybe a delegate or a representative, and there is a lot of different, let's say, emphasis on whatever, and so it sort of piles up a lot of stuff into your body. But it's still, as you said, it's an training, it's an organizational training, it's in a certain protected environment. It is protected because it's not in the open professional field where you work and where, I don't know, maybe long-term relationships are at stake, or you have to take care of whatever, and you may be afraid to lose the job and so forth. It's a protected environment where you have the ability to observe your own actions, to observe actions of others, to really step into it, to really involve yourself. And this piled up a lot of emotion in myself. This piled up a lot of memories and a lot of different impressions. And I figured out that it's best for me to get rid of it, not only in an intellectual way, but also in a way, for me it's good to dance a little bit, or to move a little bit, to walk a little bit, or to jog a little bit, or to have a certain togetherness with others that is somehow releasing a little bit this sort of energy that, and I mean really biological energy by that, you know, because it's metabolism. Whenever you are in anger, whenever you are sad, it's all about metabolism. So there is something happening in the body. And that's why I say being cathartic at the end, giving the body some option to get a little bit rid of the tension by moving the body, by sweating a little bit, by having fun, maybe whatever you want to enjoy. Maybe it was summer and there was a lake nearby, so maybe just go for a swim or stuff like that. So this is basically what I meant in having a cathartic episode. It's not so much dramatic. It's actually rather trivial, just get a little bit rid of this strong experience over the last 5.5 days.
And I'm wondering if such emotions come up during 5.5 days, how many emotions might pile up during 5 years in an organization, and how much time we give ourselves to depart from one organization and jump into the next organization. So that's usually quite in a rush. For me, I experienced the end as very stressful because it was so cozy. And I talked about that in another episode about working in the smaller group. There was a lot of consensus. There was a lot of good discussions that we had. And it felt very comfortable. And leaving that comfort at the end to have to get out of the comfort of the group again, that seemed to have been very stressful for me unconsciously. And I tried to avoid getting out of the group by focusing on tiny little details of our last presentation. At the end, we had to give a last presentation. And suddenly I got very, very excited to make a very, let's say, good performance, to show a very good performance. Because then suddenly it became very important to me to impress the staff, to impress the others, and probably also the fear of myself, to convince myself that I really have learned something, despite me pulling myself back in certain occasions. So I wanted to deliver a perfect presentation. So I started to discuss each and every detail. And as a group, we did that. And at one point I felt so stuck because we discussed things over and over again, and it was impossible to come to a point. And at that point, by the way, 2 members of the group said they had to leave earlier. So they left on the day before the last day. I had to leave earlier on the last day to catch a flight. So the group was somewhat falling apart. Everyone was starting to do their own things. And at that point, I asked a member of the staff to join us and say, hey, take a look at that. I feel stuck. Something is going on, but I don't know what is going on, what is happening. And the member of the staff, I found that quite helpful. He pointed my awareness to endings and how difficult endings can be for people, and that we might struggle with endings. And that helped me to realize how difficult it is to let go of things. And one way to deal with this pain, and raising the matter of anxiety again that came up throughout a couple of the other episodes, one way to deal with anxiety is to discuss tiny little details, because these are things that you can control and that help you to focus, to move your focus away from the pain of letting go, of leaving something. That was a very intense realization for me at that point.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that also emphasizes the role of the staff, because not only that the staff did give input and expertise and their opinion, they also sometimes did what they call an open staff. So they sat down and everybody who wanted to could listen to them, and they discussed the ongoing process from their point of view. And this all the time gives at least a little bit of an idea, first of all, how to look at the whole OLAB, how to be able to make sense of whatever happens, and what might be an interesting thing to observe and to gain learning out of that. Yeah, and especially like you said right now, Jürgen, at the end, there was sort of more openness to ask the stuff, and there it increased over the days, you know, while there was, as far as I remember, at the beginning, relatively small motivation to go to the stuff and ask, or to ask the stuff for advice. This motivation sort of came with time. And it was also, I think, interesting because not only that the end is happening between the participants, but it's also happening between the staff and the participants. So the staff is also part of the end.
Yeah. In my fantasy, when you said it's the motivation to ask the stuff towards the end gets bigger, my fantasy is, we talked during one of the other episodes, that there might be a struggle between the participants and the staff, because the staff, in the role of the authority, doesn't do what the members of the organization expect them to do, so they reject the authority. And maybe this rejection gets less over time. So in the beginning, I don't like the staff, and there is a revolution against the staff, and they're bad staff. And towards the end, this is going down. This aggression towards the staff is probably going down. And then people, or the system, the staff and the people, start to be more performant in a way, in the best case. So that was quite interesting to experience the end. As I said, I was happy that it seemed to have ended quite well. At the same time, I think there are also a lot of learnings if it doesn't. And I'm always excited to hear you talk about the difference between your first OLAB experience and the second OLAB experience. And I'm still considering to do another one. But let's wrap it up here with the fourth episode in this mini-series about the OLAB, the Organizational Laboratory or Organizational Training, where the two of us tried to give the listeners some ideas about how it might be to be in such an experiential learning setting, knowing that it is basically impossible to capture the essence of experience in such a thing. So maybe you have an idea how it can be, but I'm absolutely convinced that the individual experience of being in an OLAB is totally different. So if you have the chance to attend one, I don't know many places where they are offered, unfortunately, but if you have the chance to attend one, it is, from my point of view, definitely a very, very worthwhile experience, very intense experience, and a good learning opportunity for everyone in organizational change projects, or for anyone working with groups, trying to scale startups or change the organizational structure and these type of things. Roland, thank you very much for being with me during the last 4 episodes. Looking forward to see and hear you next time.
Thank you for having me.